Good morning, Marie.
Good morning, Carol.
What is your last name?
Dunkle, D-U-N-K-L-E.
Okay. What year were you born and where were you born?
I was born in 1952 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And can you describe your family's political preference or background?
Well, my mother always thought that Richard Nixon got a raw deal. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And what is your profession?
I'm a management consultant. I do safety and environmental consulting all over the country.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And what political party do you support?
I'm a Democrat.
And have you been involved in political activities in the past? And if so, can you describe some of those?
I can't say that I've been involved in political as in party activities. No, I've been involved in activist activities, but they're for different causes.
And do you have family members who have participated in activist movements and describe their involvement?
Black Lives Matter, that would be one activist movement. That would be one. Another might be, I can't remember the name of it, but no, not too much, not too much.
And have you participated in a march before?
Yes.
And can you describe that?
Well, when I was in college,
Oh.
I went to Penn State, and so the Vietnam War was still happening, and so I did a couple of marches near the campus or on campus. And then back a year or so ago, I did participate in the Black Lives Matter march in Ohio.
Okay. Why did you want to march on January 21st?
Well, at first I didn't. At first I had decided I wasn't going to do that because I had to have a good reason for doing it. And a negative reason wasn't a good reason for me. It needed to be a proactive for something. I don't think that being angry and jumping on a bandwagon was going to help. But then I gave it some more thought, and probably less than a week before the march, I made the decision to support. And those reasons were that there was decisions being made as far as the cabinet, and so I could see we had reasons to be supportive at that time, and then just be supportive for the whole movement, and that's what drove me finally to do that. I mean, I have plenty of causes that I feel passionately about, and I wanted this to be crystallized more than I thought it was at first in order to participate, and it was the right time.
Okay. Which march did you attend, and why did you choose to attend that particular march?
I marched in Atlanta, and I'm about 2 hours from Atlanta, so that's where we are right now. And so that worked out logistically, and was able to take Marty down, and it all worked out well.
Oh, so then you didn't have to take a bus?
No, I didn't.
have to make that decision?
No, I drove down with a couple of other people. I drove them down.
So your process and planning, did you go with a group from where you were at, or did you?
No, I went
What
with
was your process?
I went with one other person, and then met others down there who I knew, and some that I knew that I didn't even know were going to be there. It was a big march, over 60,000 people, but ended up seeing a number of people that I knew and were sisters, and it worked out really well.
Okay. What issue is most important to you?
Politically, the environment is very important to me. I mean, I'm involved professionally in that field, and I'm involved as a volunteer with Georgia Forest Watch. In fact, I'm the district lead for Georgia Forest Watch here in this part of Georgia. And it's something I've been involved with all my life, and actively involved. And I'd say the other important thing is a woman's right to make decisions about her own body and live the way that she knows she needs to live. It's right for her.
What other issues did you see represented at the march, and how do you feel about those issues?
Other issues I saw were sexual equality, gay rights, economic rights, and I feel strongly about all of those, but you asked me which ones were key in terms
Sure.
of what I'm most passionate about.
Mhm.
So all of those are important to me, and I don't know, what do you want to know?
Okay. And I think you covered this next question, or touched upon it somewhat early on in our interview, but was this your first time participating in some kind of protest?
No, it wasn't my first time. Back in the early 1970, I participated, and as in the Black Lives Matter, I participated last year in a march. And I think all of these are a bit of a protest, but for me, they're more a statement than a protest. This one in particular was about solidarity. Solidarity with, and being able to show be part of a larger group of people and show that there are a very large group of people, not just women, because there were men involved in this march as well, who feel strongly enough to get out and to be able to show the numbers. I think that was a piece of it, and we did.
And I think earlier on when we started the interview, you alluded to the fact that you didn't view it as a protest. It was more of an awareness, a movement.
Yeah, to show that there are a lot of people thinking other ways.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I feel strongly about. You have a right to think the way that you choose and what is true to you. And I don't want to be angry about what someone else thinks, and I'm not. And when I got the sense that this wasn't going to be an angry march, and it wasn't, it was joyful. It was joyful.
Yeah.
That made a difference to me.
That's a good term. I think that summarizes it well for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Before the march, what were you expecting or hoping to get out of this experience? And again, I think we've pretty much covered that in the clarification, unless you have something
Before the
more.
march, it was more simply a show of solidarity and demonstrating concern with some of the cabinet choices that were being made. And since they had been made, it showed a direction, a definite direction. It wasn't just wondering what was going to happen. It showed a definite direction that things were going to be moving. And we need to stand up and say, that's not the way we want our country to be, our world to be. It's not just the country, it's the world.
Were your friends and family supportive?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I didn't plan it far ahead, and I was busy before, I didn't make a point of letting family members know. Most of my family members are out of town. And certainly my friends were supportive, but there were other acquaintances that didn't know I was going either. But I remember the day after the march, I got a call from my son who lives in Utah. And he said, "How's it going, Mom?" And I said, "Great." And he said, "Been doing anything interesting lately?" And I said, what do you mean? And he said, you mean the march? I said, did you know? And he said, well, I saw something on Facebook that you had, and I hadn't posted anything, but you know, other things had been posted. And I said, well, I didn't want you to be concerned, and I was going to get in touch with you after. My son's 36, and he's in the military. And I said, what do you think of that? And he said, oh, we're so proud of you. He said, we are so proud of you. And he said, our dad's proud of you as well. I've been divorced for over 30 years, but my ex-husband and his family were proud of me as well. And we don't always see eye to eye on some issues, but that being part of that show of solidarity was important, that this family member be part of. So I got a great support. And even with some of my Republican friends here, which is a very conservative community, when I mentioned it to them a couple of days later, they said, oh, I think that's great, because in their eyes, it wasn't a negative protest. It was, again, a show of solidarity and the right of all of us to, with joy and fortitude and conviction, being able to stand up for those things that we believe. Their right as well as mine.
Okay. The next question then is about the group that you traveled or marched with. And again, we somewhat alluded to that a little bit, but is there anything else you'd like to add about that? Like who you marched with once you got to the march?
Well, you know, I met some people who I know from here in Rabun County who were down there, and I spent time with them. I spent time with a couple of people that I went down with. You became part of a bigger group of people, and everyone spoke, and everyone laughed, and everyone cried together, and it wasn't like you were part of a smaller group. You became immersed in the wholeness of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. What were your feelings during the actual march itself?
During the actual march, I guess my feelings were, some of my feelings were the wonder and joy that it was such a diverse group of people age-wise, people in their 80s and 90s to small children, and my other impression was that there were so many smiles. It wasn't about frowns. It was about smiles, and it was a positive experience, and there was a pride in it too. So that part of that reason why I went down as a show of solidarity, it continued to be meaningful as being part of it.
Okay. Also, right along with that same question, these last three questions, I think you've pretty much described it in answering some previous questions, but it was describe the atmosphere at the rally and the march, and I think you've clearly...
It was peaceful, it was respectful, it was... a lot of people were having fun with it, and we should have fun in life, even if those are serious topics, and these were serious topics.
Sure.
Serious topics of sexuality and the environment and women's rights and all of these things, that economics, racial issues, all of those are important, but we can still smile about it and not get caught up in heaviness.
Right, right. Very well put. Did you have signs, and can you describe some of the signs?
I didn't come with a sign. I probably have my picture with some other signs, but we didn't carry signs ourselves. There were plenty of signs to go
There were some clever ones.
There were some awesome signs. A lot of creativity.
What were your favorite chants? Were there any chants that you heard, anything?
No, it wasn't like marching for Vietnam, anti-Vietnam, hell no, I won't go, or we won't go, or there's some chants in the Black Lives Matter, but I don't remember any one chant or two chants that that were pervasive. No, can't help you there.
Were there any speakers at the rally that you were able to hear, or any that you liked or disliked?
Well, that was probably the one biggest disappointment, is that the organizers didn't have the technology or use the technology for others to be able to hear the speakers. And I'm sure at the end there were, maybe there was some technology there, but by the time we got to the end, we weren't able to hear speakers.
Mm.
So I was disappointed in that, but that was the only disappointment.
And
We listened on the way down, we listened through the radio to the speakers in Washington. So we were already pumped with speakers when we got down there, and they were pretty awesome. Okay. People like Gloria Steinem. It was like having her in my car.
Yeah, nice. As far as law enforcement, describe your interaction with any law enforcement and how they presented themselves.
Well, in Atlanta, they were kind and professional, and I remember making a point of speaking to a number of police officers at different points and thanked them for the way they handled it all, just trying to keep things just focused and in the right direction. They weren't pushy in any kind of way. I thought they were awesome. I was pleased with the role of law enforcement. I felt safe. Never for a moment did I feel not safe. I think that's important.
Did you see any opposition posters?
Maybe one or two along the way.
And
they were just
how
there.
were their activities?
They were just standing there. They weren't marching, but along the way, at some point before we got to the bridge, I remember seeing some opposition posters, and I don't remember what they said, but it was, nobody commented.
And what about the media coverage? How did you feel about that?
I think that was a really disappointment too. In Atlanta, this is the home of CNN, and we saw very few reporters, and the helicopters coming over were police helicopters, they weren't news helicopters. And I wondered, why aren't they covering this? Mm-hmm. Why aren't they covering that over 60,000 people were doing this Women's March in Atlanta? Mm-hmm. A lot more than was predicted.
Yeah. And
I wondered, was there a reason for that? I was suspicious, honestly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And how did you and your group manage to stay together?
Well, we had phones to be able to text. That was probably the only, because phone calls, there were so many people making phone calls that it wasn't going to work. So a little bit of texting. And then, meeting at appointed places.
What are some of the moments that stand out to you? When you step back and think about it, and it's been a couple months now. What stands out?
What stands out was going through the MARTA station, arriving, and this was a morning that had been pouring down rain, and seeing the people with the signs, because I didn't know what to expect, and the young people and the joy that they were feeling in being part of this That stood out. Another thing, because I mentioned it was raining, pouring down, is that at the assigned time to get started, although it started much later, but at the assigned time, the rain stopped and the sun came out. It was almost like a sign. You know, I don't look for signs, but it was like, whoa, this is perfection. And it didn't rain after that. Clear skies, that was meaningful. It was encouraging, I think, to a lot of folks.
And I think that pretty much covers the next question, which is, did you feel emotional at any time? That was an emotional time.
It was an emotional time,
Yeah.
Sure it was.
Yeah.
Joy is an emotion, and I felt joy.
Yeah.
There were so many people, and we learned of all of the other places while we were there, that were part of this. It gave you hope. It gave you hope that these issues that are so important, there were enough people standing up, and we're going to continue to stand up. I believe they would continue to.
Mm-hmm. And what about your trip home? Describe the mood. And again, this particular question refers to the bus trip home.
Well, it was a drive.
Yeah.
It was in my car.
So, can you describe your feeling and your emotion?
Well, we talked again about why we had gone down, and we talked about some of the signs, I'm sure. We talked about the numbers, because the numbers were a lot more. I know it had been predicted somewhere maybe 20,000, and it was, like I said, over 60,000. And so there was an elation about the number of people at our location, and we're hearing about all of the other locations that took the time to do this.
Mm-hmm. This next question really doesn't pertain to you again, because you weren't an organizer of a bus trip or
No.
anything, but the last portion of the question does pertain to you.
Okay.
Would you do this again?
Yes. Yes.
How did you feel the day after the march?
Well, when I started, I think it was the march was on a Saturday, and so Sunday morning, I believe I spoke at a chapel I go to, Unity Chapel, and I didn't speak about the march, but I made it clear that several of us had been part of it, and why it was important. Just again, without talking about it, talked about how you can't make peace when you're angry, and it wasn't about being angry. So, yeah.
And how have you felt since that time? Because now a lot more time has gone by, so how do you feel about?
Well, I think that the passion and the anger that so many people have felt, it's dissipated, and that's good. Now we can begin getting down to the work. Here, following the march, there were starting meetings of Mountain Progressives, which is an organization that didn't exist before that. And so being involved with that, and realizing that a lot more people were going to be involved with than there would have before the election.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of this is positive. Everything that is happening is happening in the order that it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that doesn't make sense, but it's getting people to speak about what's important, and then getting them to also speak and learn to speak, because it's a skill. They have to learn to speak to people who don't agree with them. And that was some of the hardest things, talking to people who don't agree with your position on certain social issues, political issues, and coming to terms with that and being able to have those conversations. And I think we're beginning to do that, at least some of us are, more skillfully and more with our hearts than with angry heads than we used to. And I think those things are evolving since the march. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. What do you plan to do now that you have returned?
I'm going to continue what I've been doing all my life. I mean, I'm going to continue being involved in environmental organizations, and I'm going, if there needs to be action on another issue, whether it's gay or lesbian rights, and whether it's women's right to make their own decisions, whether it's equality in the workforce, any of those things, I will speak up, and I continue to. I went down and met with my congressman probably a month later on issues involving seed and pesticides, and that's all part of this as well. And mentioned to his staff, yeah, I've been involved in that march, but it wasn't about anger, and I didn't come to their office in anger. I came to present a perspective, and that was good.
Yes. So what do you hope will happen moving forward?
What do I hope that will happen? I hope that less of us get stuck in our individual thought places, that less of us get caught up in the prejudice, not just racial prejudice and prejudice against a variety of other things, but prejudice against one political belief or another political belief. Because I think maybe that's the prejudice that's going on right now. And if we can't talk to each other without prejudice, if we can't talk to each other and listen, then things are stuck. And so what I hope is that we get unstuck, so that if enough of us can be speaking to each other who have different political positions, then maybe that will eventually make a difference in Washington as well.
What is your fear?
Well, what is my fear? I'm not afraid.
You're not afraid that was your response?
I'm not afraid. When you ask, I'm not afraid. I feel like being afraid gives energy to those things that you're afraid of. So I've got to be fearless. I think we all have to be fearless in going into this.
Will you continue to support the mission of the march by attending future marches? And if so, if not, why not? And if yes, why?
I can say possibly. Depends on the reason why. What's the objective? There needs to be an objective, not just to go out and expend energy without objective. So if I agree with the objective, and I agree that the strategy of a march is going to be important to that objective, then I'm with it. And I did before, so.
Do you feel that the movement of the march, the momentum will be maintained?
Yes, I do. More than ever.
And how will that be done?
Be done on the local level. Be done with groups like Mountain Progressives, making it safe to put our time and energy and our personalities into these same issues on a local level. And that draws more people who feel like it's important. I've seen this already. And that's where the success will be. It has to happen on the local level, grassroots.
Did any part of the march surprise you?
The one thing I was
the speakers.
Yeah, the one thing I was surprised about is that the lack of color. The lack of color, especially in Atlanta. We've all got work to do along those lines.
So how have you felt about the new government's activities since the march?
I think those activities are disrespectful and often dangerous. I don't think that they're mindful of history, and I think when you're not mindful of history or respectful of history and other viewpoints, then it's not just a slippery slope, it's a descent. So again, I'm not going to be fearful, but things will change. Everything changes in time.
What strategies can you suggest for other people in order to cope?
To cope? Breathe. Number one, you gotta just breathe through it and look at the wonderful people and the wonderful environment around us. Appreciate that. Not be fearful that you're going to lose that, but breathe and appreciate what we have and know how important it is and be thankful. Be thankful. I think that's part of the coping mechanism for any individual that will get us through the concerning times and the concerning decisions and attitudes.
What would your advice be for anyone who is considering going to a march in the future?
Bring water, bring a good pair of shoes, be prepared to walk more than a mile or two. Know that you can do that. Be prepared to be in a big crowd, mentally prepared for that. Take MARTA, and just be mentally prepared to not be angry, but know why you're there. Just know why you're there in terms of the issues and what's your heart. Follow your heart.
Okay.
Best I can do.
All right. That concludes all of the questions.
Okay.